Welcome back to Educator.com. This lesson is on the story, part 1 of a 2-part lesson. In part 1 of this lesson, we will be discussing where to get your ideas. Where do your ideas for your stories come from? We will also talk about moving idea to story. What makes an idea cinematic? Let's begin. So let's talk about the idea. And where do ideas come from? I've been doing this for a while, and I will say that from my own experience as well as observing others, the best ideas come from material you know intimately. They come from you, your life experiences. It could be an event, an idea, a feeling, a dream, a character, someone you know. So it's the events in the lives around you, not just you, not just your life, but other people that you know, things that happen to them. People in your life that might make great characters are also great inspiration for stories. Read the newspaper, watch the news, think in terms of stories that you could maybe tell. So news articles or something you see or hear in a local or the national news, also great places for inspiration for stories. Where else do your ideas come from? They can come from history. A lot of times we look to events that have already happened, big historical events that really happened as inspiration for a story. You may actually take that event and turn it into a fictionalized account, so far removed from it that it doesn't have anything to do with the real event other than it being the inspiration. Or you could actually be doing a biopic or reconstructing the history through a documentary. So do research, whether it's reading books on a topic that you're interested in or inspired by, or you can interview people who have had something interesting happen to them. You can interview people that might make great characters. Also, this is really simple, but it's so true. Just look around. Look, listen, see. Ideas for projects come from the world around you. Okay, so there's some other really great active ways to come up with ideas and to expand on those ideas. Once you have the little kernel of an idea, you may want to expand it and develop it and see what else is there. How rich is it? So brainstorm. So there's actually some tools to develop the idea further, or tools to discover a new idea. You may start brainstorming off of one idea and come up with a whole other idea for a whole other project. So you want to think about stream of consciousness here. So you want to let your mind wander. We all have things that we think about, that we feel, ideas that are already there, and it's about letting them have the space to breathe and to come out. So no internal editing when you do this process. There are no bad ideas, just ideas that need development. I tell my students that all the time. And a really great technique is to actually throw ideas out to a friend or a group of friends and just let it flow back and forth to kind of see what you could discover together that might work, that might be interesting, that is evocative for both of you. So take a walk and throw out ideas. So I find that walking, some physical activity, actually allows for ideas to start flowing and for the development of those ideas. Or you can get real formal with it and get into a circle and do what we call a group brainstorm, where one person might be in the middle of the circle and they're just throwing ideas out to everybody on the outside of the circle, outside of them. Or it could be you're just in a circle and people are just throwing out, working off of one singular inspiration of an idea. Okay, there's some more ways to develop the idea further or to discover the new idea. So one is just to free write. And again, this is a stream of consciousness where you just write and you don't let your hand stop. And in that, you might discover some things about a character that are interesting or some events. And then there's this other formal process which is called clustering, and you've probably all done it when you were younger, in elementary school or middle school or even high school, and I still use clustering all the time. So if I had the idea, I'm really interested in surfing. So I might use a cluster chart. I start with this one word, surfing, and from that I might think, okay, well, there's surfboards. Okay, well, surfboards are made by shapers. Okay, well, back to surfing. We've got the ocean. In the ocean, there's the fish and animals. Okay, with surfing, we've also got waves. The science of waves, maybe. So here I've done this chart, and it may not seem like it's all related, but somehow I got to science coming from waves, and maybe I start with inspiration of surfing, but maybe I'm going to make a video documentary about the waves and the science of waves and how are the waves formed and where do they come from. That might be my exploration. So this clustering technique is something that we all have done in one way or another at some point in our lives, and it's a really great one for you to brainstorm and kind of expand an idea and develop it. Okay, more on the story. So these concepts that we're discussing about how to develop an idea, how to find an idea, these concepts apply to narrative as well as to nonfiction storytelling. So in your story, you're going to have a central character, a main character, often called the protagonist. So when you start developing your idea, you want to know who are the main characters. And to that end, you want to define for yourself, what does the character need? And then, of course, what gets in the way of that character getting what they need? These are called obstacles. So every character has a need or a want, and the thing that gets in the way is the obstacle. So you're also going to be thinking in terms of dramatic situations. So the needs and the wants and the obstacles all create a dramatic situation where there's conflict. So we also talk in terms of the premise of the show or the film or the idea of the documentary. And to that end, you really want to define, what is the conflict? Is it internal? Is it external? And who needs what from who or from what? Sometimes what they need is not another person, but it's a thing or an event that needs to happen for them. And what gets in the way? So to that end, when we start having dramatic situations, and characters who need things, we have actions and stakes. So what is at stake is a question that you're always going to be asking yourself in every type of project. What can your characters gain? What can your characters lose? And again, you need a definable obstacle that gets in the way of them getting what they need, what they want. And then when you're figuring out as you're writing your story, or developing your story, what your characters need, what they're going to gain, what they're going to lose, these characters, they have actions that they play, and the actors have actions. So what are the actions a character takes to gain what they need? So ideas become stories when something happens, and we're going to have a beginning, middle, and end. That's how we're going to start thinking about our story. And we're going to define the key events for each, the beginning, middle, and end. So this is how we start developing an idea. A tiny little idea starts to get fuller as we have our main characters, and we have their needs and their obstacles, and we have actions that they play. And then we start to organizing it around what is happening. What's the beginning, middle, and end? And what are the key events? And then eventually there's going to be a resolution and what it all means for us. Thematically, emotionally, what's the journey that our character goes on, and how is there a resolution? Does it get resolved? Okay, so when we're trying to develop a story, we want to think in terms of a simple conflict. And so I call this create a simple conflict need statement. Really, really helps for you to understand what the story is about. So you have a name of a character. What do they want? Fill in, state the character's need. But then state the obstacle. What gets in the way? So an example would be, let's say there's someone, Sally really loves John and she wants to marry him. So you've got a situation where you have two characters, but the thing is that John loves Sally, and John, they get on well and they have a life together, but John's family is maybe not super keen on Sally and some of the choices she's made in terms of career. And so maybe John's family really, really, really don't like her, don't want her to be part of their family. And John, he loves his family. So Sally is our main character. She might want to be with John, right? To be with, or even to marry John, right? But his family gets in the way. So it's a really simple statement that tells us who the main character is, what they need, what they want, and what the conflict is. Okay, so we're talking about ideas for stories, for projects, and really when we start thinking about the idea, we also need to think about what makes an idea cinematic versus it being a poem, a short story, a novel, or even a song. I mean, because there's lots of ideas that have stories, but they don't translate into cinematic stories. So in film and video, it's a visual and auditory medium, and that's something we always have to keep in mind. So to that end, how do we learn about our characters, the events, the place? So what you want to do is define the event, place, mood, and character. That's the first step. And then once you do that, you want to say, well, okay, in that world, when we see the events happening, when we imagine the character, what can we see? What can we hear? And within what we can see and what we can hear, what are the details surrounding that event, surrounding that character that we see and that we hear? And you want to remember the whole concept of show, don't tell. It's an old concept that goes back and runs through all different forms of storytelling. But in film and video, it really is more important because all we have is what we see and what we hear. So you really do have to show and not tell. You can't have someone pop into your video and say, hey, that character is really sad and here's why. So you have to show it somehow, not tell about it. So thank you very much for watching part 1 of a 2-part lesson on the story. Thank you, and this is Educator.com.